Space Marines are cool. They are in fact very cool. And also make absolutely no sense.
Oh my god, bro.
Wait. Allow me to explain. The imposing figure of an Adeptus Astartes encapsulates the essence of the heroic warrior archetype, a massive plate armor-clad giant, the pinnacle of physical strength and martial prowess, the product of extensive genetic engineering, and a result of decades of work in numerous funds and valuable resources, that gets bodied by a screaming green degenerate born literally yesterday. But I am getting ahead of myself. What I am definitely not saying is that there shouldn't be Space Marines or you shouldn't enjoy them, or that the setting needs to be realistic or even make sense really. The entire 40k universe is purely vibes-based, abiding by the rule of cool, and as such is intentionally, ludicrously over the top and exaggerated, which is why most of us, including myself, enjoy it. And cool nights in space is one of its best aspects, as Games Workshop sales data surely confirms. So please temper your expectations to this entire video being one giant actually, which has been absolutely wrecking my head ever since I made the Dark Angels video, especially when comparing them to actual real-life military units. So before I move on to the Emperor's Children in the next one, I just have to speak my mind and share the most lukewarm, facts and logic take possible on Space Marines as a concept by way of making this video. This might not be a popular one with Space Marine fans, but if you do enjoy it, remember to like and subscribe. And with that being said, let's find out why pouring enormous amounts of resources and steroids into brainwashed child soldiers may not be the most efficient way to fight a war. Unfortunately, war is in reality a lot less about cool guys with guns and PTSD, and a lot more about logistics and economics. It's literally the pay-to-win mechanic, but in real life, and wars are lost by whichever side runs out of resources first, be it biomass or petrodollars. And the thing about Space Marines is that they are a huge resource sink. It takes multiple surgeries and much genetic manipulation to create just one Space Marine, not to mention the custom war gear, the weapons and ceramite power armor, which is as much of a supercomputer as it is means of personal protection, and probably costs more than the average Hive City block. This process does not happen overnight either, taking potentially up to 8 years, and time is a resource the Imperium probably lacks in the most. Should the neophytes survive the years of extensive implantations and surgeries, as well as the brutal training regiment, and mature into a fully grown Space Marine, receiving the Black Carapace, the final subdermal neural implant which allows for a direct interface with their power armor, they are then treated basically as a modern-day fighter jet. Basically an overpriced strategic weapon platform that requires a massive support infrastructure of tech priests and chapter serfs for maintenance, as well as astronomical operating costs. The difference being is that a fighter jet is used in carefully planned surgical strike missions, often with air superiority being a prerequisite, as the loss of even one has major economic and political repercussions. Like, for those of you watching at the time of the video release, the F-15 recently shot down over Iran. Actually, saying this video was released during the war in the Middle East might not narrow the date down all that much. Now, Space Marine tactics, on the other hand, are basically like using the aforementioned F-15 as a battering ram, the Adeptus Astartes famously enjoying charging enemy gun lines in pursuit of glorious melee combat. And should the Space Marine fall in combat, which they do a lot, it's not just the time and money that are gone, as there is another even more precious and finite resource that may be lost. This resource is so valuable that Space Marine chapters have dedicated guys that go to battle to recover it from their fallen brethren. I am talking, of course, about the Primarch-derived gene seed, which is used to create all other additional Astarte organs. Now, it's not really finite, as I said earlier, and more can be produced, even with the Primarchs being gone and no longer being able to beat off into test tubes, or however they extracted it previously, but it's so difficult that it's genuinely easier to have apothecaries rip the gene seed out mid-battle. If only the Emperor didn't remove the Astarte cock and ball organs and allow them to somehow reproduce normally. Nah, never mind, we're not going there. By the way, you want to hear something absolutely wild? The IDF practices so-called posthumous sperm retrievals, which they have already performed on more than 250 fallen soldiers to preserve their gene seed, and children have already been born from this method. There goes my point about 40k not being realistic, I guess. And another quick point about Space Marines being so massive that it makes no sense financially. Not only are you creating a bigger target, all of their equipment, from weapons to armor and vehicles, not only has to be bigger and hence again more expensive, it is also completely unusable by other human soldiers. However, these immeasurable costs could be justified, especially for a state so resource-rich that it routinely deletes its own planets with seemingly no massive financial loss, if the super soldiers produced outstanding results, right? Well, I would argue that they don't. Sure, a Space Marine can take 10 men in a fight, but within the context of the setting, that is completely unnecessary. Ranged weaponry is available in many advanced and equally terrifying forms, and the average Space Marine chapter doctrine of bringing knives to gunfights is perhaps slightly suboptimal, as charging a Tau railgun emplacement while armed with a construction tool is the quickest way to reunite with your beloved God Emperor. Of course, not the most original thought, and melee has been memed by the community for years at this point. Space Marines, of course, do have ranged weapons themselves, most commonly the iconic bolter, that is essentially a rapid-fire rocket launcher. But you know who else can use bolters? Regular humans. Sure, the recoil on these things must be absolutely insane, but if your ultimate goal is just to point and shoot, this can be achieved by a baseline guardsman, the resource cost of whom, comparatively speaking, is almost non-existent. That is the whole purpose of firearms in the first place. Guns are the great equalizer, and were invented specifically to nullify the difference in physical attributes and training between combatants. A quick plug for my video where I talk about this in detail, albeit in a more fantasy context. Now, the logical argument to be made here is that a Space Marine can shoot better and aim more true, but one Astarte hitting a target is only a quarter as effective as 4 out of a squad of 10 guardsmen hitting the same target, which also, again, costs a fraction of the price to do. This is even more relevant when you specifically require mass volley fire, like when you're trying to hit a difficult-to-reach weak spot, something like, I don't know, the gaps within Astarte armor. Indeed, Space Marine armor is restricted by their still overall human physiology. Ever since the first humans covered themselves in something harder than their own flesh tens of thousands of years ago, the problem of vulnerable areas in armor has existed and been the downfall of many a warrior. And since these very expensive Space Marines have a tendency to sometimes fall to chaos and turn comically evil, this is a weakness that Imperium forces often have to exploit, and a single Astarte is far less likely to accomplish this than, say, a squad of guardsmen absolutely lighting up a Khorne berserker.
Blood for the Blood God.
There was even a case where a word bearer literally got killed via spear wound to the neck by some regular human tribal. The thought of an actual caveman destroying a walking tank with an actual sharp stick is objectively as hilarious as it is based. Since we are comparing space marines to tanks, we can refer to yet another currently ongoing conflict as of the release of this video, namely the Russo-Ukrainian War. It would be inaccurate to say that tanks have become obsolete, but they certainly lost much of their effectiveness due to the existence of RPG heads sellotaped to Temu drones that can take out a multi-million-dollar armored vehicle. Applying the same concept to a space marine, which is even more vulnerable due to, yet again, having armor joints that a tank wouldn't have, strapping some C4 to a servitor skull or a Tau drone would do the job wonderfully. And even that might be overkill, as a simple frag grenade thrown by John Guardsman could do the exact same thing. On the topic of Slavs and tanks, the final point I would like to make about cost versus efficiency. Some may disagree, but the T-34 tank is widely considered to be the best tank of the Second World War. Was it because it had the highest firepower? No, that was the German Tiger II tank. Was it the fastest, maybe? Again, no, that honor belongs to the American M18 Hellcat. So why is it considered the overall winner? It's because it was enough. Sure, it made a number of innovations like the 60-degree sloped armor. It had great mobility as well as a solid main gun, but its main advantage was the ability to be mass-produced and the ease with which it could be repaired. Indeed, in 1943, the Soviets built more T-34 tanks than their German counterpart, all of their tanks combined, completely overwhelming the Wehrmacht with their far more cost-effective machine. If you want a more modern example, one of the many reasons the US currently struggles in the Iran war is that each 50k USD Shahed drone launched by the IRGC requires at least 2 air defense missiles like the Patriot or THAAD to take out. An exchange even the world's first economy cannot keep up, no matter how much it saves on healthcare. And in the Imperium's case, an investment like a Space Marine being taken out by a much cheaper, mass-produced but cost-effective unit like an Orc Boy or any of the lesser Tyranid creatures is certainly an unsustainable exchange, particularly over thousands of years of the 40k timeframe. The point that I've been trying to make this entire time is that Space Marines are expensive. Very expensive, and I'm not just talking about the model prices.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
And their tactics do not justify these costs. The massive resource requirement to produce, like 1 million Space Marines that are active in the galaxy at once? The Imperium apparently has over 1 million planets, which means that entire worlds can live for countless generations before being devoured by a Tyranid High Fleet or turned into furniture by the Drukhari without ever even seeing a Space Marine. Space Marines are so cost inefficient that I'm actually starting to think that the stupid f***ing Reddit Gooner joke of Lamau, Emperor gay and just wanted to be surrounded by muscular men might actually be true. He was, after all, born on the territory of modern-day Turkey. There is a point to be made that the real purpose of the Space Marine isn't combat efficiency, and the cost argument is not applicable. Can't believe I'm unironically quoting the Joker in 2026, but it's not about the money, it's about sending the message. The symbology is what really matters here. The psychological effect on the Imperial Guard, that is doing 99% of the real work, that the Emperor's angels might have, as well as the opposite effect on the enemies of humanity, and that is something money cannot buy. You have to agree, a bunch of regular guardsmen sitting in a trench 100 meters away is far less pants-shittingly terrifying than an 8-foot-tall autistic manchild sprinting at you in full plate, screaming something about a long-dead monarch. I know I made the fighter jet comparison earlier in terms of operating costs and maintenance required, but now let me go in a completely different direction with the Space Marine combat role. This one is a bit of a hear me out, but if I had to compare Space Marines broadly as a group to a real-life military unit, it would actually be Napoleonic-era line infantry. The bright colors and complete disregard of camouflage, not just for easy identification and unit cohesion, but also for the intimidation factor. The audible component of music, the famous drums, flutes, and fifes, not just for morale and issuing commands, but again for the unnerving of enemy forces, like the Space Marine hymns, chants, and cries for the God Emperor. Finally, the tactic of overwhelming volley of fire, and then a charge into glorious melee to ultimately break the morale of their opponents. The entire purpose of Space Marines is as shock troops, overwhelming assault and almost literally shocking their opponents with their so-called transhuman dread. But there is a difference in both setting and context. In our real-life history, these tactics worked well against fellow humans, and the opponents the Space Marines face are far less likely to be affected by such displays. Whose morale are they trying to break exactly? The incomprehensible Tyranid hive mind? The emotionless Necron constructs? Or the Chaos cultists under the effect of like 16 different hallucinogenic substances that just performed a ritual self-circumcision before the battle to honor their god? Khorne really doesn't care from where the blood flows. One of the few factions that would actually be affected by this pointless Space Marine display of color and sound are the Orcs, but it would actually have an opposite effect on them that was originally intended. There is a point to be made that the Space Marines were far more useful during the Great Crusade, when the goal was to bring long-lost human worlds into compliance, and seeing 8-foot-tall gigachads descend from the skies would likely increase the planet's chances to join the superior human team peacefully, but as of the 41st millennium, this seems a bit redundant, and it would make far more sense for the Marines to act as the actual special forces that they are meant to be. Indeed, being far fewer in number than during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, by the way, one of the most devastating events for humanity caused by these very same Space Marines, you'd think the Astartes would reassess their tactics and take on a more careful approach to war, but nope. Only a few selected chapters like the Raven Guard and the Raptors actually behave like special forces. And even then, if subterfuge is the goal, why would you have the 8-foot-tall brick shithouse try to hide somewhere when you could just get a regular-sized guy and invest the money saved on something like, I don't know, actual stealth technology? Oh no, our world has been infiltrated by the Alpha Legion. I wonder who the imposter could be. Well, there you go, an entire video of me shitting on the most popular element of the entire setting, which, by the way, I do myself enjoy, and I wouldn't dedicate an entire series on the channel to Space Marine Legions if that was not the case, as well as collect them in real life. Anyway, this video was sponsored by the Astra Militarum. Astra Militarum, the real heroes of the Imperium. Again, this was all just for fun and an excuse to yap about some real-life history and make a few bad jokes I thought of during the Dark Angels video. A huge shout out to the channel members for continuously supporting this nonsense, and we'll be back with an Elder Scrolls video relatively soon, followed by the Emperor's Children Legion real-life inspiration, unless I do a video about the new upcoming Metro game. I don't know, we'll see. Thanks again for watching, and as always, until we meet again.